Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first plenary session where we will be looking at faith, what we believe, and the role of faith in the world today. In his work, Islam and the Destiny of Man, Guy Eaton wrote, "Religion is sometimes an instance of all or nothing. Either religion guides and determines the way we choose to live in this world together, or religion will be dwarfed by the world and thereby lose its relevance." Now, following on from the discussion in our earlier session, I'd like to take up the point made by Karen that faith is not a matter of simply personal belief, but it's also our commitment to society and how we live in society. And one of the themes that we'll be discussing in this plenary session is how religions also teach us about how to interact with other faiths and other beliefs, that how religion recognizes diversity and complexity in this world. Now, as we saw in the earlier session, this has also become more and more difficult in the world that we live in today, where misunderstandings, apprehension, anxiety, fear, these have become the leitmotifs of the modern world that we live in today. So, without further ado, I'd like to begin by inviting Bishop Ayus, who is the president of the Interreligious Dialogue Council, to address this issue.
Thank you.
Bishop?
Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to say from the very beginning of this speech that Singapore must be considered as an example on how it is possible for people of different religions to live together, to cooperate together, and simply to be together. Our globalized world, as the presentation of this conference says, faces the risks of fragmentation, growing intolerance, and the mainstream of extremist views. Hence, the necessity for us all, citizens and believers as we are, together with people of goodwill, to promote the true values of our living together in order to promote human fraternity for world peace and living together, as expressed in the recent message of His Holiness Pope Francis, together with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmad al-Tayyib, launched to the entire world last February the 4th from Abu Dhabi. As we know, faith plays a major role in forging social harmony in pluralistic societies. I come here representing the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, so my focus and contribution to this conference remains in this area of dialogue. As a Catholic deeply involved in interreligious dialogue, I can only but point to the impact of the declaration Nostra Aetate from the Second Vatican Council, when the bishops gathered from around the world clarified for the Church, in relation to many other religions and persons of goodwill, that the Church exhorts her sons and daughters that through dialogue and collaboration with the followers of other religions, carried out with prudence and love, and in witness of the Christian faith and life, they recognize, preserve and promote the good things, spiritual and moral, as well as the socio-cultural values found among these people. Nostra Aetate has given the Church the doctrine and practice by which we as Catholics must approach other religions and believers. We cannot truly call on God, the Father of all, if we refuse to treat in a brotherly way any man created as he is in the image of God. With the declaration Nostra Aetate, our model and mission, it has been in the interest of the last 5 pontificates, together with leaders of other religions, to encourage interreligious dialogue and to draw on the spiritual and moral heritage of religions for the values which contribute to harmony, to encounters between cultures, and to the collaboration for the common good. Moreover, all religions in different ways urge their followers to work together with all those who endeavor to assure respect for the dignity of the human person and his/her fundamental rights, and who foster a sense of fraternity and mutual assistance as essential to living together in society. Today, as we see the growing number of conflicts which make up the war in pieces cited by Pope Francis, we see the great increase in number of refugees and migrants who have nowhere to go or to be safe. We live and develop in multicultural and multi-religious societies. To say this is to state the obvious. There is no religiously homogeneous society. The concept of fraternity is at the very core of Catholic social teaching, deriving its fundamental essence from the common origin of each human being, created in the image and likeness of the Creator. This explains and promotes our belief in the human dignity of each person and his/her right to religious freedom as a unique expression of the image and likeness of the Creator. Harmony. We need harmony. We need a network of multiple relationships of solidarity, of justice and love, thus breaking through that sense of isolation, which represents one of the deepest forms of poverty that a person can experience today. And harmony asks that we leave behind our hidden areas of isolation in an effort to discover the other. As we all know, religion has often been blamed for promoting prejudice and bigotry. Consequently, there is the temptation to see religion as a problem, thus making it a private matter, taking out of the public sphere. But religion is not a problem, but is part of the solution of our reality. So we are all called to work together in society, to do works of charity, to participate in the national debate about the dignity of every human person, to propose essential values that constitute a just and civil society, and to moralize the national conscience. As Catholics, we know that the church missionary form inscribed in the very order of faith obeys the logic of gift, that is of grace and freedom, and not that of a contract or imposition. Clearly, brothers and sisters, interreligious dialogue is a necessary condition for peace in the world, and thus a duty of all of us. Because dialogue, and through dialogue, we create a school of humanity and becomes an instrument of unity, helping to build a better society founded on mutual respect and friendship. So let us renew our commitment so as to promote fraternity a fraternity that allows people who are equal in their essence, dignity, freedom, and their fundamental rights to participate differently in the common good according to their abilities, their life plan, their vocation, their work, or their charism of service. Indeed, the protocol by which we will be judged is based on brotherhood and sisterhood. As you did it to one of these, the least of my brethren, you did it to me, says Jesus in the Gospel. Clearly today, this also refers to the abandoned as migrants, refugees, and victims of human trafficking. So we as believers from different religions, we have to embrace a dynamic which can support peace as a global priority. Peaceful coexistence, because this is an inestimable benefit to peace and to harmonious human advancement. So let us also be aware that by preserving our differences and keeping solidly radicated in our own identities, that we are also to rely on prayer, asking God always for blessing our wounded humanity. And this will lead us to live in a spirit of mutual respect, mutual understanding, and mutual acceptance. Just to end, let us renew our commitment. Our Christian faith teaches that to provide an opportunity to find the peace they seek, and I refer to migrants and victims of human trafficking, to seek requires a strategy combining 4 actions: welcoming people, protecting them, promoting them, and integrating them. Promoting entails supporting the integral human development of migrants and refugees. Among many possible means of doing so, I would stress the importance of ensuring access to all levels of education for children and young people. This will enable them not only to cultivate and realize their potential, but also better equip them to encounter others and to foster a spirit of dialogue rather than rejection and confrontation. So thank you very much for your listening to me.
Greetings and namaste.
It's time.
Before I begin, keeping with the Hindu tradition, I would like to chant a peace prayer, asking for happiness, well-being, and welfare, and wisdom of all beings. And the prayer is in Sanskrit. Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukmag bhaved. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. I sincerely thank Madam President for her inspiring remarks last evening and the organizers of this conference for drawing attention to such an important theme. As a mother of 2 daughters, as a teacher, and as a dedicated person to interfaith harmony, I feel personally inspired by this conference and the remarks of Madam President. So from the onset, it is essential to note that Hinduism, or traditionally known as Hindu Dharma or Sanatana Dharma, is not a monolithic religion, as we heard this morning that all religions are not monolithic. But Hinduism has no known founder, no single holy book, no essential dogma, and no central authoritative figure. And that complicates the system. So many philosophies and thought systems, including Vedanta, yoga, theistic and non-theistic schools of philosophy, respond variously to the questions: what is the ultimate goal of life? What roles ethical principles play in personal development and the experience of the divine? And above all, how do I relate to the other? Hinduism, by its very nature, has been pluralistic and encompasses a variety of beliefs, theological viewpoints, practices, and traditions. With this plurality of texts and traditions is its history of over 3,000 years of debate and accommodation, as well as interactions with various religions. Hinduism or Hindu Dharma offers resources for us to consider the positive value of interfaith relations and vision of cohesive society. Historically, as a scholar for Hinduism, we always look at the history. Hinduism developed through its interactions with the teachings of other religions and philosophies. For example, Jainism, Buddhism, and Sikhism, three other religions originated on the Indian subcontinent, contributed greatly to what is today known as Hindu thought. Christianity arrived in India as early as the 1st century and Islam in the 7th, 8th century. Judaism and Zoroastrianism has a long history in India and their interactions with Hindu thought. Despite varied ideologies, the Hindu attitude toward these religions has generally been charitable. I grew up studying the texts and traditions and personally drew inspirations from them. Lord Buddha, Lord Mahavira, and Guru Nanak are revered in Hindu tradition. Islam influenced the medieval Sant tradition of Hinduism, and Christian value of love, yes, the love, the way Kiran Armstrong talked about it, impacted the thought of 20th century thinkers like Mahatma Gandhi. It is difficult to imagine Hinduism without such intersections. The idea of diversity and sensibility for common welfare is integrated in all aspects of Hinduism, theology, metaphysics, ethics, rituals, and festivals. So I'll give here just a few examples. Theologically, Hinduism proclaims that divine reality is one, which is expressed through various names. The most ancient text of Hinduism, the Rig Veda, proclaims, Ekam Sad Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Truth is one, but the sages or Veds speak of it in various ways or various names. Not only an understanding of presence of the sacred is in all beings is foundational to personal well-being, but to the well-being of all. It's interesting, even in the United States, I have seen many Hindu temples, altars include the murtis and photos of the Buddha, Lord Mahavira, Guru Nanak, and Mother Mary with baby Jesus, along with many Hindu deities. These acts reinforce the connectedness of our community. Metaphysically, in Hinduism, truth is so multifaceted that no single human mind or religious thought can capture it entirely. Religions encompass humanity's struggle to realize the truth. The multiple truth claims by various religions are only facets of the truth expressed through the prism of the realization by great religious leaders, prophets, spiritual masters, and wise men and women. A 20th century Hindu leader, Swami Vivekananda, proclaimed, I quote, religions are different forces in the economy of God, working for the good of humankind. Here, I think he used the term God broadly, not in the terms of personal God. Ethically, in Hinduism, a person can be identified as wise, good, or fulfilled. He or she lives in conformity with dharma. So dharma is a Sanskrit term. It's derived from the root word dhra, meaning to hold or sustain, cohesion, connoting law, order, virtue. A person of dharma or good person not only sustain her or his inner being through a virtuous life, but seeks to sustain the well-being of the society and natural creation through compassionate actions. The concept of karma, which has become very popular in the United States, has comes around, goes around. It has very deep meanings, and it also propels humans to perform right actions. However, this is the beginning of the path. Hinduism focuses on the realization of the oneness with the divine, which results in experiencing the oneness with all beings. According to the Isha Upanishad, the ancient Hindu text, one who perceives all beings in the self alone and the self in all beings does not entertain any hatred on account of that perception. So I am in all in me. A human being is always connected to others by virtue of underlying unity of all, and thus it wants moral obligation to the individuals and all association to work for the good of society. The good society is a process of constant development. The principle of karma and dharma empower all individuals to contribute to the common good according to individual capacities. Yes, all are actors and agents in building a cohesive, sustainable society. The individual always remains at the center of society. However, it is difficult for humans to live up to these teachings, as we know. Mahatma Gandhi's life and works are exemplary in this regard. Though completely broad-minded, he identified himself as a Hindu. He integrated Hindu philosophy of the unity of all beings and dharmic virtues of nonviolence, truth, simplicity, self-restraint into social and political programs for creating a just, peace, and cohesive society. He was also inspired by Jesus' love and Islam's and Sikhism's egalitarian philosophy. His vision of free India mandated bringing harmony among people of various religious traditions and also taking care of those who are marginalized in the Hindu tradition. He appealed to the religious teachings of Hinduism to confront bigotry and establish Hindu-Muslim unity in the 20th century India. According to Gandhi, the real religious life always occurs in relationship with the good of family, society, nation, earth, and the world. Religions offer resources to promote harmony among religious and spiritual communities of the world and to foster engagement with the guiding institutions to achieve a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world. It is not surprising that independent India's constitution, though based on secular principles, defines secularism very uniquely. It does not strictly conform to the model of irreligion. Doesn't mean secularism is no religion. Rather, secularism is defined as equal respect for all religious traditions. Sarva Dharma Sambhava. So I'm a teacher. In my classes, I have undergrad students. I find that students' experiences are enriched when they learn diverse belief systems. Although some adhere to one God, some to many gods, and some to no God, like Buddhism, Jainism. Some see heaven as a goal, some go beyond the concept of heaven and hell, and others seek to realize heaven on the earth. Each religion is a unique knowledge system with its rituals, arts, theology, and ethics. My students who are unfamiliar with religions before taking my classes find that most of the world's religions encompass some form of the golden rule, care for the other. And I personally have been very influenced by the teachings of various traditions. Through relationship with the followers of different traditions, our personal growth is enhanced. German thinker Friedrich Max Müller rightly observed, to know one is to know none. We really learn about ourselves through relationships. The collective wisdom of religious traditions is a great asset for humanity, and we as world citizens must educate ourselves and in turn enhance our lives. Notwithstanding, some factions promoting Hinduness, which is so ironical for me, Hinduism does not seek to convert the faith of those who follow different traditions, but teaches to transform our own hearts so we can see the unity, so we can all live in harmony by honoring each faith. Witnessing a diversity of religions in India, Mark Twain, when he visited India, he wrote in his diary, a quote, "With regard to religion, India is millionaire," because there was so much diversity of religion. We must cherish our riches, our millions, our religious wealth. Just as diversity in the ecosystem is necessary for the survival and flourishing of our planet Earth, similarly, diversity of religious thought ensures the human race flourishing. Each religion must be seen as a unique strand in the tapestry of the world's culture, enhancing its beauty and holding its integrity. Such an approach seeks unity of hearts, but not a dismantling of unique theological, ritual, and philosophical paradigms. In our contemporary times, when the forces of bigotry and fanaticism are raising their heads, the Hindu scriptural proclamations, Atmavat Sarvbhuteshu, all beings are soul kins, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, entire earth is our family, must be the guiding principles to create a just, peaceful, and cohesive society. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, eminent scholars and leaders, greetings of peace. Very good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is indeed a great honor and great privilege to share this stage with eminent leaders and scholars and to learn from the wisdom. I think as Karen said in the morning, one of the missing pieces of this conference earlier on was about what religions say about the topic of social cohesion and compassion. And I'd like to add to that, which is what also religions do and need to do about it in our societies. My role, together with other speakers on this panel and this stage, is to reassure you that we have some answers from our own faith traditions to the challenge of strengthening social cohesion. I hope we do have some answers. But allow me to share my thoughts, as well as I think it's only fair that I see a lot of colleagues and friends from the Singapore Muslim community who have worked very hard, the good people out there who have worked very hard. If you recall the commitment to safeguard religious harmony, they have been very supportive of the idea. And this is a work that we've done over the last decade in terms of strengthening the message of peace, compassion, the idea of rahmatan lil alameen, the Quranic ideal, and how to translate it in our work within our diverse society. I am from the Islamic Religious Council of Singapore, and with the leaders in the council, as well as the Mufti, together with our religious teachers, we have worked with our mosque, our institutions, our madrasas to drive this message, and also working with other communities across different faith backgrounds, really to strengthen interreligious dialogue, and in the process, deepen our understanding of each other and arrive at an ideal state of social cohesion. We do it through various means, interreligious dialogue, sports, even for the young people, but also a very important theme is feast, like we saw in the play yesterday. It's a very big theme in Singapore, if you have not noticed. Eating is very important here. We just finished the month of Ramadan. We had a lot of opportunities to feast together with various other communities when we break our fast. It's a very important dimension, and you'll see from some of the images that I show on the panel, on the slide, of what we've done thus far. Previous speeches in this conference, President Halima's speech, as well as His Majesty the King of Jordan, the play that we witnessed yesterday raised our attention to a very important theme as we speak of social cohesion, which is differences. I think for religious communities, this is even a greater theme and a greater challenge. But I think our traditions, and at least for me, Islam, prepares me to think of difference in a positive way from the very start. If interfaith is your thing, you would certainly know that an important character or figure is Abraham, Prophet Abraham alayhi salam. As Muslims, we read about Abraham quite abundantly in the Quran. There is a chapter called Surah Ibrahim, a chapter on Abraham, the 14th chapter. But in doing so, in reading about Abraham in the Quran, I am encouraged to refer to other scriptures, not to only consider the Quranic and Muslim viewpoints and commentaries, not only Tabari and Qurtubi and the Muslim commentators, but also to consider what the Talmud says, what the great Jewish commentators like Rashi and Rashbam, in the Midrashim, when they talk about Genesis 26:5, as well as what the New Testament figures and the Apostle Paul says in his epistles, such as in Galatians and Romans. These are very important themes. And within an interreligious context, the stories about Abraham remind us of commonality and difference. And it can, as the historical evidence have shown, be pulled in whichever direction one is more inclined towards. For example, the story was particularly important from the point of difference in the formative years of these different religious communities. And of course, we have evolved over generations into distinct faith communities with our own understanding of salvation, but we also inherit, at the same time, a very important and shared legacy of intertwined traditions of interpretation, practice, and coexistence, something which the Lumen Gentium and Nostra Aetate of the Second Vatican Council talks about. Of course, we know that the social-religious world is a lot more diverse, far more diverse. It is not only Abrahamic. Singapore, for example, is considered the most religiously diverse country in the world, and probably our conference has made it a lot more diverse as well. And for a relatively small country, geographical space, we frequently encounter people of different backgrounds in our daily lives. But I think everywhere we look, religious leaders are fairly aware of the challenge of diversity. There has been some discussion about the role of communities and youth beyond just religious leaders. There have been, over time, a lot of efforts at rapprochement and reconciliation. Religious leaders today are very comfortable to sit around the table and have serious discussions. But our challenge today is profoundly different. It is less of encountering difference and more of living with difference. Are we adapting fast enough to be neighbors with others who have very different lifestyles, beliefs, and cultures, and to share so much of our common spaces on a daily basis? And can we transform this into a cohesive environment where differences do not give rise to fear, suspicion, and resentment, but instead nurture confidence and add vibrancy to our societies as we work towards the common good? I think it is important that we first recognize the relationship between faith and the social context. Whatever we believe and we practice, we do so within a certain context. And the notion that we can ignore our context, yet remain successfully committed to our own faith, is rather tenuous. How do we remain faithful, yet oblivious to the serious existential threats that humanity as a whole encounters today? Whether we talk about violence or hate crimes or terrorism, environmental crisis, highly interconnected but fragile global economy. And all this, as His Majesty the King said in the morning, have serious implications on our societies and on social cohesion. So such challenges demand that we religious communities plan and prepare well, respond and adapt adequately, and educate widely. So there are three areas which I think are pertinent for our consideration from the Muslim perspective. Given the amount of time that we have, I'll focus on three very quickly: theology, ethics and character, and interreligious competence. In the theological realm, some of us may hold the view that God's nature is unchanging. There shouldn't be a debate about theological shifts or conceptions of the idea of God. But I think it is precisely this inaction that have led to, in some cases, the spread of a theology of hate, a theology of exclusion, a theology of vengeance in dealing with religious differences. And these forms of theology have been deployed to justify atrocities and crimes against other communities, and even against Muslims with whom these groups disagree, known as the Takfiri ideology. At the very least, we must strongly oppose any form of theology that foment hate and fear. But I think even this is inadequate. We cannot be theologically ambivalent in dealing with our social context. We need to ask difficult questions. Should our understanding of God evolve and change as we live together with difference? And what does a compassionate and ever-loving God mean in our times and for our context? It is important that we put forth a theology that speaks of inclusion and compassion spoken by many of our speakers and panelists, drawn from the eternal compassion of God that allows us to recognize the existence of others who are different, and that requires of us to live in harmony with them. If we look into the Quran and look at the teachings of the Quran was itself an interlocutor in a diverse social-religious world of late antiquity. It is still replete with references to and conversations with different communities, even as it preaches the message of monotheism. And Quran tells us that differences are part of the divine plan, and it exhorts a moral way of living together. This should be the norm, and this should be the mainstream. But it is indeed a tragedy today that this has become more of an exception in some cases. And there are many reasons for that, part of which is because differences were, and in some cases continuously viewed, almost exclusively from the perspective of truth claims, which is a quintessentially medieval outlook, which can lead to confrontation, the quest for superiority, and therefore a disrespect for different religious viewpoints. And here I think theology needs to work hand in hand with another key dimension of our religious traditions, which is ethics. Religion is ultimately about self and social discipline. We have heard the Buddhist as well as the Hindu and Christian perspectives on this. But I think here too we need to ask important questions. What is the role of our religious ethics in a diverse and multi-religious society? How do we show care, love, and compassion to neighbors and friends from different faith backgrounds? What values must we prioritize, especially to combat bigotry and break down prejudices that are inimical to cohesion? I think in a world of difference, the virtue of hospitality is highly instructive, because hospitality demands of us to treat someone or some community with which we are unfamiliar as our guests. And in the words of a 10th century mystic from Baghdad, we should not annex them to something we already know, because we are very guilty of annexation. We always put someone with whom we're not familiar from the perspective of what we are very familiar with. But we should decenter ourselves and let the other, the new person, the new member of our community, be the center of our attention. So in the context of living together, we should be able to express our happiness for our neighbors and friends when they celebrate something important. This is captured in the commitment to safeguard religious harmony, to wish them well on their festive occasions, to exchange visits. And in my view, this is part of the ethics of living with difference. The idea of tahiyya, or greetings in Islam, mentioned in the Quran, وَإِذَا حُيِّيتُم بِتَحِيَّةٍ فَحَيُّوا بِأَحْسَنَ مِنْهَا أَوْ رُدُّوهَا. The idea of tahiyya, which we need to broaden just beyond the expression of salamu alaikum, but as a form of greeting to other people. And add to this the idea of maqasid, or the objectives of Islamic jurisprudence and the philosophy of Islam in living together in a diverse society. And even as we disagree, our religious traditions teach us not to turn away from another human being, but to find ways to do good and to respect them at all times. The Quran states an important principle: وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا. Whoever saves a life, it is as if he had saved all of humanity. And cosmology tells us the significance of this. As Carl Sagan said in his Cosmos, if a human disagrees with you, let him live. In 100 billion galaxies, you will not find another. Much of this, in conclusion, requires that we develop a deep understanding of an engagement with our own history and traditions, as well as our interconnected histories, with some level of sophistication and criticality, so that we do not misinterpret and misapply lessons for our times. And to do so requires competence, to be more specific, interreligious competence. For example, we rarely find episodes of peaceful coexistence in history taught and discussed from the perspective of living with difference. Often they are seen from the point of the victor or the victims. We speak of minority communities under the rule of a dominant majority. And we know that this was not true all the time. There were other voices, stories from other perspectives. The neighbor who shared life with his or her neighbors and respected them, the trader who traded with everyone, the physician who tended to the sick, whose faith did not matter, because his or her aim was to save lives, and the judge or qadi who adjudicated a legal dispute for litigants from a different faith, because he was only interested to dispense justice. For religious and community leaders, our priority needs to be about educating our communities that this is the right way of living our faith in a diverse society, and to build consensus amongst religious teachers, and then reach out effectively to our communities. I think, allow me to say that as humanity faces some of the great challenges today, our faith communities should be resources and catalysts for vibrant coexistence, not as obstacles and impediments. Our traditions are vast and historically rich, that with the right will, commitment, and resources, we can find the solutions to live with difference successfully, and there is enough in our traditions to make differences work in our favor as we aim for greater social cohesion. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Your Honor Ambassador Ong Kyung-yong, Executive Deputy Chairman of ICCS, fellow clergy and monastic, and so many excellent esteemed guests here. I would like to thank Ambassador Ong Kyung-yong, the Deputy Chairman of ICCS, and the President of Singapore Buddhist Federation, Venerable Guangping, for inviting me to this conference. It is also an honor to be amongst such distinguished people. Ms. Armstrong, your work on the Charter of Compassion, your Grace the Archbishop Ayuso, I congratulate you on your recent appointment as the President of Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue. Dr. Nasir, your work on promoting interfaith harmony. And Dr. Howard, your work on non-violence and cultural understanding. It is also an honor to be in this session with all of you. Amid the wonderful diversity of culture and life forms, we are one human family and one earth community in which we depend on each other for survival. The United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement are sure blueprints for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. This could be only accomplished through the partnership and collaboration of everyone. Changes are happening across the board around the world. Although we may not know what the future holds, we can be certain that our action now contribute to the future direction of the world's development. With sweeping changes, whether wanted or unwanted, come fears, anxiety, and stress. Some people have trouble coping with it. Others thrive. Religion can play an essential role in helping people handle change instead of reacting with anger and other emotional responses. The starting point of any interfaith dialogue should be the recognition that for every believer, his own religion is the right and the closest to God or any other absolute. We believe that the major world religions each have their own historical and geographical context. Therefore, we respect and recognize the equality, diversity, and multidimensionality of religious culture, norms, and beliefs. Every religion brings people universal value in mutual respect, charity, forgiveness, and cherishes life. Our religion is taking up the task of purifying the human spirit in the interest of humanity. We should connect the universal shared values of respect, mindful listening, communication, and mutual listening to ensure the equality of all partners and the possibility of free expression of opinions, perspectives, and beliefs. The dialogue aims to seek common ground while respecting differences. This is to say, not to eliminate differences between regions, but to search for common values and spiritual principles. The dialogue should be focused on finding ways for peaceful coexistence and cooperation between all people. Religious diversity, just like our human being palm. Our human being palm have 5 fingers. Each finger grows up and looks differently. We should not let our finger to against each other. We rather than to let the 5 fingers coexist, cooperate. Then our palm can work, and we can get the benefit for ourselves. No one should impose their own system of worship, ritual, or principles or claiming their superiority. Master Sun Yun, the founder of Dharma Mountain, said the poverty of material things threatens the lives of people, whereas the poverty of the spirit and heart takes away people's living environment of security and happiness. Humans display failings and weaknesses from the 3 poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance. We get angry when you shouldn't. That's our egos motivates us more than they should, and are entirely too concerned with doing what's popular rather than what's right. War and conflicts arise from people who are divided by culture, religion, and other forms of stereotypes inherited from previous generations. They will likely exercise the same divisive practices from over again and pass them on to the next generation. Such differences have served as barriers in building trust and care between peoples and regions. As long as there remain inequalities between classes, as long as people feel they have little hope for a good life and remain unable to tolerate others believing differently than they do about important issues, violence and war will continue. The outer phenomena of peace or war are the expression of harmony or conflicts within the human mind, which means the real path to the world peace cannot be found in the passing of more laws, in diplomacy, or even in war itself. It can be found in the actions individual human beings take to reform the tenets they hold in their hearts in order to become wise and compassionate. And the action and appreciation for differences play a substantial role in peace building. We should use wisdom in realizing our potential as a human being and transform hostility into mutual tolerance, acceptance, and enrichment of intercultural understanding. Let me briefly restate this main point. Number one, we respect or we depend on each other for survival. Number two, respect is a universal value taught by all major regions. The willingness to put down our own stances and perspectives will give us the capacity to connect and dialogue meaningfully, to discover our commonality and collective wisdom. Number three, when everyone in the dialogue is treated as equals and everyone's contributions are just as important, the collective wisdom of the group is activated. We can develop essential qualities of how and what we learn together that will create space where thinking can be transformed and collective wisdom can be generated. Number four, when everyone feels equally vested in the dialogue, the solutions will be more holistic and can lead to meaningful levels of cooperation that seek to support each other. Number five, and the last, when we can support each other in our fellowship, tapping into our wisdom, transforms hostility into deeper intercultural understanding. Then we can support each other in our common endeavor with compassion. Let us master the spiritual courage to challenge traditions of domination and violence. Let us work for systemic change, for a new norm that will enable a future where all people can realize their enormous human potential for consciousness, creativity, love, and caring. Thank you very much.
Looking at the questions that have been submitted so far, I can clearly identify two clusters of questions that are more or less surrounded around two distinct themes, and then a host of other questions that seem diverse. There's one set of questions that I find particularly interesting, and I'm struck by, Veena, earlier you talked about being a parent and a teacher. So am I. My daughter once asked me, "Dad, what would you do if there was a zombie apocalypse?" And my reply was that we already live in a zombie apocalypse. We consume in an unthinking manner. We read the news in an uncritical way. In so many ways, we are already zombies. But it's actually telling that young people today, this is the world that they live in. And I believe this is an important point to make. It is a terrifying time to be young. For the younger generation, I'm rather tired of the way in which millennials are constantly being harassed and blamed for being addicted to video games. Millennials didn't invent the video games. Adults invented the video games. And this is the world that we've bequeathed to our young. They live in a world of routinized daily violence. They live in a world of commodified identities. They live in a world where hate has become mainstream. And yet in the midst of all this, where is the voice of the young? And there are many questions related to the young here. And so this is the question. I'll choose one which I think encapsulates the other questions as well. And this is the question that I've chosen. How would you encourage youth to contribute to the fostering of interfaith dialogue in the community today, bearing in mind, these very real factors that I've mentioned earlier? So how would you encourage youth to contribute to the fostering of interfaith dialogue in the community today? So can I invite Karen first to address this.
Yes. Well, I'm not a parent, but I remember as a child, I was also living in a terrifying world. It was the time of the Cold War. And the time of when we really did not expect to grow up. Are there many young people here at this conference today? And perhaps we should invite some young people to be speakers and on panels to hear what they have to say. Because I've had my life, but I do remember the frustrations of being young and not being listened to, and fear, and so I think we should all of us engage in whatever kind of work that we're doing. We should bring young people in. They should be here on the panel. They should be out there in the audience. And they are beginning to speak out. I mean, in Europe on Thursdays, in Belgium, every Thursday morning, the young people leave school and go outside the parliament to protest against the environmental catastrophe that we're approaching. This young Swedish woman, young girl, is changing the world. And they should be here. We should not be telling them all the time what to do and what to think. Because as I said this morning, we have no certainties. There are no hard and fast doctrines about God, because God is transcendent. And we have no answers, really, to what mess. I won't mention the dread Brexit word again, as you asked me to before we came on the platform. But we're living with absurd rulers, and we're handing them a very difficult world. But my generation was also handed a difficult world. And I think of my mother's generation, who she was 17 when World War II broke out. My grandfather, who as a young man spent 4 years in the trenches of World War I. And I think it damaged him for his whole life. So these are difficult times, but they're not. We've had difficult times before. But listen and learn from the young. We don't often do that enough.
Okay. Can I invite the other members of the panel to also address this? But remember, the question is related to the topic of interfaith dialogue. Living as we are today in a world fraught with crisis, where crisis has become normalized and people have come to expect this. And I think the perception among a lot of young people today, we see this again and again in surveys carried out in East and West, this faith in the future is diminishing because young people are told that you're not going to have stable jobs anymore. You're going to live in a very complex world. You're going to live in a world where violence is going to be normalized. Now, faith is belief in the future, belief in humanity, belief in your personal religious beliefs. These are all interconnected here. So the question again, how do we bring young people into this interfaith dialogue? Because it's not simply a matter of personal belief, as you noted, but it's also a matter of belief in our common humanity and our common shared future. Can I perhaps invite Bishop Ayolo to
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would say the opposite. I would address parents rather than young people, in the sense that sometimes we adults are very worried about how to educate or to indoctrinate our children of what they are already living at the grassroots in their daily lives, when they go to school, when they go out with their classmates. And I have been recently spending one day a session of work on the study in a public school in Rome. And I was really delighted because all my worries in promoting interreligious dialogue, my fears, all those differences, challenges, and problems that I see in society, thinking in helping a new generation that is growing, by spending one day with them in this public school, all my fears practically disappeared because they were standing just next to each other, you know, from China, from Africa, from Italy. So it's a mixed culture, but different backgrounds, different races, people who were Christians, they do not believe anymore, people of goodwill, agnostics, belonging to other religions, not Catholics, and other confessions. And I had this positive impression they had. So I think we should rather survey on how we do accept them for what they are, and we reassure by applying and taking care so that in equilibrium they may continue living this experience of exchange that perhaps we are lacking of. And so one of these problems perhaps is Pope Francis on the day of Pentecost. He was in his homily of this Catholic celebration, he was saying that there is a growing culture of insult and hate that is spreading today. We are becoming very social, but do not socialize with others. Just to say and to indicate just that today there are certain challenges that is not affecting the youngest, but it is affecting society as such. For the adults, if we think of the elders, you know, how does society takes care of the elders, those who are suffering of any kind of these rare, strange diseases, how does society help them? Their parents, people with Alzheimer that alone. How many times we read on the newspaper about the people who are abandoned, who are living in this solitude. And so I think that it is here, you know, that from birth to death, from early morning when we get up until the evening we go to bed, there are so many possibilities in order to help each other, to support each other, to trust the youngest by guiding them, not to instruct them and to indoctrinate them, but to stand hand in hand with them, walking with them, accompany them, and surveying in order that they may not fall into going astray in their lives, so for their future. But there is another aspect. You were talking about millennials, and this is another open problem for society, because in society we are all building social cohesion by contributing for the common good of society. And Karen also mentioned how many percentage, 25% people being poor, but it's not only in London or in Britain, it's everywhere, you know. There is a growing number of people who are starving, who are deprived of the minimum for their living, for their survival. So it is there where the cohesive societies have to work. I have mentioned in my address the issue of refugees, and there are many people suffering from this, and how can we really... So here, I think that we are sharing common citizenship. We are all belonging to the human family, and therefore, how do we build this human society? How do we render more human our societies? I think that it is here where we have to struggle, and this is not done as citizens, but also as believers, because we are not citizens or believers, we are citizens and believers. So here, religions, and through interreligious dialogue, we have a lot of things that we can do.
Okay.
For example, in the sense of, for example, of relief, you know, I'm delighted to see today how many relief agencies and communities, they are working together in order to help the needy in particular circumstances. Good witness, this one.
To take up that point then, and I can like Veena to address this, because we are both educationalists, so we engage with young people all the time, and a cursory look at popular media today will show that on the one hand there's this deep skepticism, this worry about the future, but also this concern. It's coming from the young. The young are concerned about the future economy, they're concerned about the environment, they're concerned about things like the refugee crisis. How does that connection get made? How do we make this connection, bridging on the one hand these very real humanitarian concerns that are also related to their concerns as the generation to come, and the question of faith and dialogue? Now, or is that even necessary? Perhaps you can talk about your own experiences as a teacher dealing with this.
Yes, thank you. So I just want to, great to hear from you, and now my teaching, especially at a state university, where we don't preach, we teach in a secular setting. And I teach comparative religions, all 13 religions, week and a half, each religion gets, and it's like bang, 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 and then they are just spinning their heads. So I want to make 3 short points. The first one is this, that we should stop talking down on our young people. First thing, they are so smart, they're so bright, and they're so accepting. The problem is not the young people. We shouldn't say, oh, millennials are like this, and that's the first thing. I really get very upset. So don't talk down on young people. The second is that let it be interfaith dialogue requires religious literacy. How can I dialogue with a person of other religion when I don't know what the other religion stands for? So what I find that, and I'm pushing for it in my university too, that all should have a basic religious literacy. And then when I teach these world religion classes, the first 3-4 weeks, people are just so tiptoeing around because they don't want to offend anyone. And when you set the ground rules, how to speak, not to what to ask, but how to ask. And I encourage them to ask difficult questions. It's okay. The real dialogue happens, not you are wonderful and I'm wonderful, let's live in harmony. Asking the difficult questions, why I have a trouble with what you believe, or tell me what you believe. So almost like teaching world religions, you are sort of training in a way, thinking about how do we speak, how do we ask questions. And I do certain exercises in class and experiment with different methods. So I have over 100 students, sometimes 125, 130. I choose to teach larger sections so that I can reach to different, larger body of students. So I ask them that they have to interview a student in your class who follows a religion other than your own. So then, toward the end, it's become so interesting. Here they were, I have Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and I have a very diverse classroom at Fresno State. And they are, toward the end, you can see the energy in the room. And there is something magical happens. Within just 16 weeks, that from nothing they knew about these religious traditions, to they can have at least basic understanding and they can ask about. And that's why I mentioned in my talk that they come together saying that no matter, I didn't know about Islam, I didn't know about Hinduism, I thought they were just a bunch of gods they follow and about Islam or Sikhism. But now they're saying, wow, that's very interesting that they have the golden rule or the compassion for others. Lastly, I want to just say how to bring them together and the question you asked. So there was a survey recently in the United States of the young people, millennials, and they said they are more interested in community service than in organized religion. So I think we can combine both, the community service and religion. And in that way, if a person of different faith working along your side, then you are able to see the humanity. You're able to really come together, not only about learning about each other, but sharing, doing it for a cause. So I want to propose at my university called service learning. So in a comparative religion course, you can have service component included to enhance teaching. So you can go to a church or wherever, or Sikh Gurdwara, and do community service. And then when we are together of different faith, so I think this can answer a lot of things, that concerns that we're thinking about.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I agree that literacy, religious literacy, cultural diversity, literacy about differences of belief is extremely important. But of course, living as we do in this very mediatic age, any educationalist is going to be confronted with challenges that come from other sources of information that might be far more interesting. When I ask my students in class to draw from memory a map of Southeast Asia, they can't do it.
Yep.
But when I ask them to draw a map of Westeros from Game of Thrones, everyone has memorized it. And they can draw the map of Middle Earth from Lord of the Rings, but they don't know the map of Southeast Asia. Now, that's the reality. That's also the reality of the kind of mediatic age we live in. So my question then to Dr. Nazruddin. Now, in your work at MOIS, we are trying to engage with the younger generation, and I agree with Veena. Activism, religious activism, is no longer simply in the religious institution, no longer in the church or the mosque or the temple. It's out there. Yeah? It's in the environment. It's in society. It's in helping refugees. Now, how do we do this? And is this a kind of religious engagement for you?
Right. That's a set of very difficult questions. And I think we are trying to do a lot of things as well to sort of respond to the issue of involving the young people and the younger generation in a lot of the work that we do. I think interreligion, that we have said, is a very important area. But I think one of the most important things, perhaps, we even start involving them is to try to really understand them. I mean, I'm struggling to understand my 12-year-old son, right? And I get a lot of the, like you said, media and what they watch on Netflix. I get a lot of the hints from what they watch as to what is going through their minds in terms of the kind of issues that they might be interested in and the kind of things that excite them as well. So perhaps one of the important foundations, I think, is to really respect the young people, give them respect, give them space. And when you involve the young people in all of this work, you must be prepared for out-of-the-box responses. Very unconventional questions, very unconventional positions, throw very difficult issues. And I think one of the reasons why, perhaps the not so young are quite hesitant to involve them is because more often than not, you do encounter very difficult situations to deal with, because the young people, no holds barred, they will ask you very difficult questions. And I think this is the same with the Muslim community, but we think it's a very, very important area of work. And I think insofar as involving them, what is very important is also to make that engagement relevant and meaningful for them. They must find it relevant and meaningful. And it's not just interfaith dialogue, it's just even faith. They must find faith meaningful and relevant for them. They must see that there is an important value to their existence as to how this helps them deal with the questions of life. And I do a lot of discussions with my son, and I must admit I'm struggling at that. But I think it's an important process of not educating just my son and the younger generation, but educating ourselves. We cannot assume that we understand everything. We cannot assume that we have all the answers. And I think it's only through involving them that you will find new solutions to the problems that we have. unfortunately, we are sort of, boxed into an area where when we propose solutions, it's always, solutions to all problems. And by involving the young people, I think that's where you get very creative ideas. What I'm aware of is actually, whilst we are conferencing, the young people actually are unconferencing. For this particular ICCS, they don't have an agenda, they don't have a theme, as far as I understand it, so it's an open book. You bring your stories, and from there we talk about the experiences. So it's a very different way of looking at things, but it's a way of looking at things that is highly relevant to what revolves around their lives and their, the discussions, they're very pertinent for their daily lives. So I think that's the way to go. And I think at MOIS, the other important work is we need to build the capabilities as well. We need to help them get the right tools and training to help them engage with the wider community. And a lot of investment is being made in capability building, in helping them get the right resources. I think that's very important. If we are serious about the work of involving the young, then we need to help them in the right ways to help them do it successfully.
Okay, so on that note, and I'd like to extend this question to the Venerable Go Hui. Since we've talked about the need to engage the young, talk to the young, work with the young, the suggestion is somehow that the young need to be trained and taught and made literate. But surely the older generation needs to be made literate as well. Yeah, the older generation needs to learn and needs to relearn and unthink some settled assumptions that we've taken for granted for too long. So how is this to be done? It surely has to be a two-way process of not simply speaking to the young, but actually not only letting the young speak, but learning from the young. The experience of a millennial today may well be very, very different and unprecedented compared to the older generation. So is this learning possible in terms of learning from each other, different faith communities? Can we also seriously engage with a learning process, learning from the young and what the young can teach us? Karen.
Thank you very much. As you said, education is the most important point. For me, after I graduate from university, I decided to become practice in the Buddhism. When I young, I see my grandfather very sick, and finally he passed away. I'm very pain. So when I also go to study in my junior high school, I saw my classmate pass away due to swimming accident and also a suicide. So I think all day, what our human being, we alive? What is our purpose? What is our meaning? So I very care about religion. When I graduated from Taiwan University, my same classmates, they go to overseas to study, and they find a good job. So it's your question is related to our education system. From our kindergarten, our elementary school, our junior high school, and also our university education, to emphasize to make a good, such a good job, to make more money, to be a millionaire, or to buy a good house, or find a good partner, a good lady or a gentleman to get married, right? So it's to emphasize the material value. So the spiritual value is not so important. So I think in Singapore, the religious education is very, very good. We learn a lot from Singapore. And also for the youth, they take a distance from religious believing. There's many reasons. In the recent year, for the regional conflicts happen very frequently, and even become a war. So for the youth, they also region people is very, very terrible. So there's a reduced interest in the region belief. So we can do more. Just Lady Armstrong said we can create such a this conference for the youth participant, not us. for example, we can set for the high school student or university student to participate, and not us. For me, I'm over 60 years old. It's too old. So we can do more to teach the youth. And they can sing, not we teach them. That's them to experience. Region building is so important.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to now lead us to another set of questions. There were several questions, many questions in fact, involving youth, but another set of questions about participation in dialogues such as this. Now, the youth question allows me to move to that. Now, the question is, often when we have events such as these, conferences, seminars, or workshops, and they're about interfaith dialogue, the definition of what it is to be a believer is itself, pivotal. Now, what about those who may hold on to belief systems which, on their own terms, they don't see as a religion? What about those who are perhaps, in a state of crisis of faith, or may not have belief, or may be agnostic? What about those who are who profess to have humanitarian values, but do not hold to any particular religious belief system in the first place? Atheists, for instance. So the question, and this is also, I think this is the second most popular set of questions that's come up again and again. How can these dialogues include these other communities as well? And I think this is the shortest version which encapsulates this question. In your opinion, what principles are necessary to be kept in mind for constructive interfaith conversations to occur? I mean, what are the terms? How far does the dialogue go? Who comes? Who can come? Who should be engaged with? So I repeat, in your opinions, what principles are necessary to be kept in mind for actual constructive interfaith conversations to occur? So can I start with by inviting the Venerable Go Hui to address this?
For the Chinese, the mainstream is Confucius philosophy. It's not so emphasized the religion belief, because religion always related to our next life, not now. But in Confucius teaching is a focus in our life, not the next life. So for my thinking is because we are human beings, the humanity is more important. Nowadays in our world, many religious belief, but we all are human beings. So be a human being, we can to treat itself, not our ideology, but we action. We can show our a kind attitude, compassionate attitude to each other. It's more important because we are human, not to talk about too high label, to become a God, become a Buddha, or any other absolute. So we can, it's it is religion is important for human, but in Buddhism, say we can accomplish our human characteristic, then we can accomplish Buddha nature. The human nature and Buddha nature is equal, not different.
So a human-to-human contact, a recognition of a common humanity.
Yeah. To contact with our common ground. Our common ground is our human being. Mm-hmm. We are human. We can share our human nature, not the God nature, Buddha nature. Mm-hmm. Is more important.
Yes. Thank you very much. Dr. Nasruddin.
Yeah. I think we have discussed this as well in the course of our presentations. There are, and these kind of dialogues serve different purposes. Interreligious dialogue really is a platform for religious groups to talk about what's common within the traditions, what are different. When we look at the Abrahamic trialogue, if you like, again, it's looking at the common origins and how those have evolved into some of the differences over centuries. But there are values and there are issues which are not exclusive to religious groups. These are common, these are important, these are central to our existence, and these are existential threats, if you like, some of them, anthropocentric in nature. When you look at the values, we talked about respect, we talked about compassion, we talked about hospitality. These are values that every human being would really cherish and want to see in society. And I think these are values that can bring everyone together, regardless of your religious orientation, spirituality, spiritual backgrounds, even if you do not belong to any religious group. And there are also issues that I think affect everyone. And it is not right, I think, if we exclude people who definitely are able to bring valuable insights to the table of discussion when you talk about environmental crisis, when you talk about inequality, when you talk about poverty, and all these other issues that affect us. What it requires, though, is for religious groups and communities and religious leaders to be very open about it. We might feel uncomfortable because we've not done this before, and I think it's the same problem that religious groups had when before the whole interreligious dialogue movement really kicked in the 20th century. People were skeptical about the motives and the objectives. They're not sure about it. And I think today it has become a norm in our interreligious communities to be able to come together and talk about it. There's trust that is being built. And I think that same trust needs to be built together with people with no religious backgrounds or who do not believe in the idea of God, non-theistic groups and so on. And that trust has to be anchored to the common desire to improve our human condition and to recognize that everyone has something important to contribute to the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Veena?
Yes, thank you for your comments. So I think when, again, I teach all kinds of students, believers and non-believers, so I have some personal insights into this question. Everyone is seeking meaning in life, and but don't know how to go about it. So those who call themselves secular or atheists or non-religious, they don't feel they sort of kind of fit in this. The religious people have that and we don't have it. But the reason they want to be, so many students come to me and tell me that, oh, my parents follow Christianity or Sikhism or Hinduism or, but I don't want to go there because for one thing, they don't kind of like it in that their practice. So one, either belief or something, so how can I practice it? But I'm forced to practice this religion because if I don't do it, my parents will be unhappy. But they, as a professor, even though I don't ever, ask them to tell me, but they will just come in office hours and share with me. But they all are looking for meaning in life, for certain kind. So how do we relate to them? And that's the whole question about that. So Gandhi had a very interesting insight into it. So first he used to call God is truth. God is truth. But when he met very dedicated ethical atheist, he said, truth is God. So he reversed it to embrace everyone. So I think it's just rather than orthodoxy, orthopraxy, how to include these people who think, or these young people who think that secularism is cool. And one student told me that I don't tell people that I'm a religious because my students will think that I'm dogmatic. So why not make religion really cool and interesting and important part of our lives so they don't have to hide and practice. So I think there's multiple approaches, the multiple ways, depending on the setting, have to go about it to include all, because the humanity is more important, right? What we believe is important, but we are as humans, that's all our traditions tell us, that humanity, as I'm listening all morning, is so central to it. And we should really, if somebody is respecting humanity and nurturing their human self and others' compassionate deeds, we should be very charitable rather than judgmental.
But taking up that point about setting and context, I mean, again, like I said, I chose a question that I think summed up many questions that were basically asking the same thing about where the limits of faith stop and who gets included into this. And it's interesting to note that when you look at the questions, when I look at the questions, again, the question of perception emerges. The perception that institutions, some faith institutions, remain exclusive and are not prepared to engage, or not comfortable to engage, not willing to engage. So how do we overcome this? Can I invite Bishop Yusuf to address this?
Well, you see, Pope Francis is calling constantly on the necessity today in the world in promoting a culture of inclusivism. Unfortunately, and I think that this is the object of our international conference on cohesive society, there are signs of exclusivism, excluding others from the normal life of society. And I think that in this sense and in this context, how important is that communities be more aware, according to their principles, their beliefs, on the necessity of coming out in order to build together the common good of society. And here there is much to be done, including, as we say, people of goodwill. And I may say that fortunately or unfortunately, the most precious people I have appreciated in my life for their good deeds, they were people who had no belief. And I was a little bit disappointed because I didn't see neither in my community nor in one of the others, I didn't see this evidence that has come from people of goodwill, open to. So our common humanity demands today efforts at all levels in order to create this platform based on humanity and a shared humanity. And for example, I have been living for 20 years in the Nile Valley. I have many friends, Muslims, who witnessed to me, their endeavor, their devotion. And in our discussions, we were always saying that our real competition should be the one وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. In good deeds, we have to make competition because faith without works is dead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, we've got just enough time for Karen to make one intervention, and there's one question I'm dying to ask here, and this, I think, Karen, you've been part of many interfaith dialogues, so have I, and as Rosnurin has said, this has almost, this has become the norm now worldwide. Now, if I picked up 1 kilogram for every interfaith dialogue I've attended so far, I'd be a sumo wrestler by now. Now, my question is this, and this is a question which I think has to be asked, and I'm going to address this to Karen. Having interfaith dialogues is part of an effort to set a harmonious understanding between people of different faiths. But how to engage in an honest but harmonious dialogue and not to fall into the trap of superficial discussion?
Well, you know, I'm not sure myself what I believe. And I don't belong to any particular faith tradition. And for years, I left the Catholic Church. I wanted nothing to do with religion ever again. But look what happened. And for me, what's superficial discussion.
Yes, I mean, how do we have a dialogue? How do we have dialogues like this?
Because you go right to the heart of it.
Right.
Instead of pussyfooting around about do you believe in transubstantiation or this, that, and the other, we are going to the heart of it. It's about being human. It's about how we live together and regard the sacred. I think what we see as sacred is important. Every single one of us is sacred in this room. Every single, I love the Hindu attitude of bowing, but to acknowledge the sacredness we see in the other. We have to decide what is sacred. The environment is sacred. We should see this God-given or whatever given world it is as sacred and live accordingly in reverence. And we should, with every human being we meet, look for that sacred core. And I used to, my early books were very angry about religion, and they were very furious, and I'm glad they're out of print, because they were also they were superficial. And what I learned, I found a phrase in a book whereby Louis Massignon, the great Islamist, said that when you look at the spiritualities of the past or the spiritualities of the present, don't just look at them from an outside point of view. Find out what the context of that tradition was, what that particular belief or that particular tradition grew up, how economically, politically, socially, entering into that, and not leave it until you can imagine yourself, if you were in those circumstances, feeling the same. In this way, he said, you will enlarge your understanding and make a place for the other in your mind and heart. Okay. And I think that's what we do in interfaith dialogue. Okay. We make a place for the other in our minds and hearts. And that's the big thing that the humanity is trying to wrestle with at the moment, to reach across the divides. But imagine yourself constantly, if I were in that situation, how would I feel? And then you make that place and see the whole attempt to try to make meaning in a world that seems utterly nihilistic and hopeless sometimes. Okay, right. That is the religious quest.
Thank you very much then. And on that inclusive and universal note, ladies and gentlemen, would you join me in thanking the members of our panel? Thank you again.